Hi, this is Dannette from Diamonds from the Dust blog. I wanted to share 2 recent faith tests that I went through with you because it is definitely something that could be a blessing to someone and help them be a bridge to pass over to the next place that you may be stuck and not be able to get through, or you need that breakthrough. And something happened to me that the Lord showed me He wanted me to share. And when He was showing me in a dream of what He wanted me to share, He titled it, How to Make Sure Your Fears Don't Come True and That Your Hopes Do. And for those of you who know the journey that God has us on, back in July of 2023, God woke me up early one morning and He said, "Follow me to the place of tangible hopes." And then He led me to leave where I was. We were staying in an Airbnb because even far before that, back in, I think it was 2018 or something like that, God told me to take the little bit of money I had and go to a hotel with my kids. And He miraculously and powerfully and supernaturally held us up and supported us for all of these years with no income. My income was my promise of God and the blessings that He would send through my blog. And so that went on for many years. And when He woke me up in July, we were staying at a beautiful Airbnb, which we had been there for quite some time. We had been there for on and off for, I think, about 3 years. And it was the closest thing to home that I had had in a very long time. And when God woke me up, He told me to go and follow Him. And He led me to a different state with my 2 kids. And I only had enough money for one night in a hotel. And I had no idea where anything else was going to come from. But I put all my faith into God, and I trusted Him to not hurt us. So we followed Him, and we've been hotel hopping basically since July. And He has covered us, and covered our rooms, and covered our food, and covered our bills. And I can't even explain. There's been so many miracles. And I never know where the money's coming from, except for usually right before I'm in need, God will show me. He'll tell me in a dream where the money's coming from and how much, and He'll give it to me as a promise. And He shows it very secretively, in a way that I need faith and hope to understand. But every single time, as I apply my faith and my hope to those little treasures, those hidden treasures that God shows me in my dreams, they've always happened every single time. All of these months that we've been carried by God in a different state, where we don't know anybody or have any foundation. My foundation is God's Word. It's His promise. It's Him. God is my home. So during this one faith test, I had been pretty broken up because during this traveling time, there's been highs and lows. It's been like a roller coaster. There's been times where we have had an overabundance of more than we could even hope for. And there's been times where we barely scrape by. There's been times where I've cried myself to sleep at night because I was trying not to eat as a way to preserve what little food we had left. And God always showed up with a new, fresh supply. But my perspective on abundance, on God's unlimited resources, was limited because I had fear and doubt by what I could see. Like what I could see in the natural. I could not see any money coming or any way to buy food. So therefore I would choose not to eat because I thought, I need to make this stretch. I need to I need to stay limited because I felt somewhere deep within that God was limited in his abundant provision for us. And even though he had given me a promise in November of last year, in 2022, he gave me a promise and he said, from now on, you will always eat well. And for that entire year, my faith was strenuously tested on us having food. And I had to believe that God would be the unlimited basket of bread to support us. And it has been quite painful because I have had to have my fears burned off through the fire testing for the faith testing. I've had to face so many fears and so many times where it looks like we wouldn't survive, and God always showed up to provide and replenish us, but sometimes it was really scary. So I was hurting. I had pain from the times where I did suffer. And God had given me a promise, and he said, no more suffering. It's not going to be the same. And then, but I resisted. I had thoughts of resistance to what God was saying, because he was saying no more fears, but I had a place of distrust. So I kind of like pulled back and resisted what God was telling me, that we wouldn't suffer. And doing that got me hurt again. And it brought back the past of where we went about 2 weeks where the food supply was really, really limited. And I was really hurt by it. And God showed me in a vision that it was like he was trimming my nails, like cutting away the past. So I was not having the same past pain reoccurring. But as he was trimming my nails, I flinched, I resisted, and I got cut. And that's what happened. So in the first faith test, I like how Bob Ross would say that it's not a failure, but it's a lesson learned. And so it wasn't a failure because I learned from my pain. I made the wrong choice and I resisted God out of fear, out of a limited perspective of God's power and his ability to reach my need. And I resisted, and I ended up going through a really low time, and it was very painful. We had enough to eat. No one was hurting or suffering in that way. My suffering was mental because I was battling fears. I remember every single day it was like new manna, just enough manna for the day would show up. And I would go to bed and I'd be in panic because there would be no food for the morning, and I would be praying and crying and stressing. And then in the morning I would wake up and there'd be like a $20 donation at the website, and I would be able to stretch that out to cover the food, the groceries, to pay for a day's worth of food, as an example. But then God fulfilled his promise after a little bit of lesson learning, and he replenished us. And we were able to stock up and see that abundance in the natural, and not just through the supernatural, spiritual promise. But it starts in the unseen, and it comes into the open by our faith and by God's power. He told me last night it takes two. It's Ephesians 3:20 to be able to see above and beyond all we can hope, imagine, or dream, or pray. It requires our faith in connection with God's power. There's a togetherness. It's a dance. Okay, so that was the first faith test. The next one I went into was even more scary because for most of this journey, or at least a lot of it, there was one way that God continuously and faithfully had provided a lot of our rooms. And it looked to be that door shut quite dramatically, and it seemed like there would be no way to pay the room. So I was back in the beginning again, where I had to trust God's word without being able to see how it's going to happen. And God gave me this promise of an amount of money that was going to come. And not only did He give me this promise, but God was showing me through my hopes He really spent a long time speaking through my hopes. And it was like going through a valley where there was darkness of fear and the present situations and all the dangers of all those things that could go wrong. And then there was the light of hope. And God was leading me along the light of hope that just seemed to go right alongside the shadow of all the things that could go wrong, of the fears, of the doubts, of the dangers. Because I can't even think about right now what would happen if God didn't keep His promise. In this different state, with there's no net to catch us, there's nothing to catch us if we were to fall. It's all 100% of trusting the Father to be there as our ever-present support and to keep His words. So I went through this faith testing, and I needed my room covered. And I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I had promises that God had given me, and I had my hopes. And God showed me the word, the facing the shadows. And He showed me that instead of facing, like there's a common thing that's like a secular training of shadow work, and it's where you face your fears and you look into the shadows and you deal with those darkness things that are there, like your wounds and your traumas. And there's a place and time for that, but this type of shadow work was different. This was the shadow of hopes against fears. So I'm walking along as if I'm going up a stairway, and there's the light of hope and the shadow of fears. And so while I was waiting for God to show up and bring money to cover our room, I just spent all my attention thinking about what I hoped for. And that's what God kept telling me over and over and over. He said, this isn't going to be done by anything but His rescue, but that I needed to stay in a place of thinking about what I hope. And He even showed me a vision of myself on this bike. It was like a bike without wheels, and I'd pedal it. And when I would think about what I would hope for, I would rise up into the sky, and I would be above every danger that's on the ground. I'd be above every place of lowness, of every need, of every poverty. But the moment I would think about a fear or a doubt, I would come back to the ground, and I would have all of these bad things trying to attack me, like slivers or thorns trying to hurt me. So during the faith test, I only thought about what I hoped for, and I could see, it was like you could see out of the corner of your eye, you know that shadow is there. There's that shadow that's like trying to get your attention. It wants you to think about what you fear could happen. It wants you to think about the dangers of the doubts of what would happen if God didn't cover our room, and that all the negative things that would come from that. And there was like out of the corner of my eye, I could see as I'm walking through the light of hope, there's on the corner of my eye, I could see there was a shadow that wanted me to look at it, but I refused to look at it. And I spent 2 weeks just looking at my hopes, refusing to acknowledge that shadow of fear and doubt and worry and all the dangers that were attached to all of the bad things that could happen. And I spent only my attention on my hope, and I looked to God to rescue us. I knew that I had nothing. I had no way to cover that room. I had nothing up my sleeve. I had no rabbits to pull out of my hat. All of my strength was in God's strength. I didn't have power. I didn't have anything. I was empty, like a bird with hollow bones that can fly up in the air because it's so empty. I had nothing. I had no way to support my family. I had no way to pay my room. But I looked with all of my hope that God would show up and rescue us, and that He would pay our room. And there's this little walking trail around the hotel where we stay, and I would put in, I made a recording that I made for myself, but I shared it on a blog for those that really want to engage their faith to see tangible hopes. There's one recording that I listened to lately over and over and over, and it's called Love Support. And it's only $5 on my website, which is diamondsfromthedust.com. And I would put in my headphones and I would walk this walking trail and listen to Love Support over and over. And I would imagine that God paid my room. I would actually see the picture of the email confirmation that my room is paid, that I get every single time that I do. And I pictured myself also going to the store and getting our needs. I pictured myself getting confirmation that different bills were paid, that my phone bill was back to a zero balance, and I just would imagine all the things that I hoped for, which also happened to be all things that God gave me promise for. So my hopes and my promises were going along the same stairway that was all lit up with God's glory. And I refused to look at those shadows of fear and doubt. And God, just out of nowhere, just very abruptly showed up with a big surprise. And He covered my room and He covered my bills. He covered our room for a few weeks, and I have 2 more weeks left on this one. And I was able to pay every single bill that I had due, which was a lot. I'm not going to go into that with you, but it was a miracle that God came through like that. And right now, many of you are going through a night season or walking through the shadows. And what that means is, for one, you cannot see when it's dark. You cannot see through the times of darkness how far away anything is. And the good news about that is it means you get lots of surprise blessings and gifts from God. Things will suddenly show up out of nowhere. And so it's a good thing. But also in the dark, there's shadows, there's illusions, there's fears. So you're in a place where you have to choose. Are you going to look to the light of hope? Or are you going to pay attention to those shadows and those fears and those illusions of how things look and seem, and all the doubts of how it could not happen for you? And when you're going through that dark season, what you pay attention to and what you focus on is where you apply your faith. And you can manifest your fears and your doubts and all those bad things that could possibly happen. Or you can manifest your hopes and God's promises and the most beautiful outcomes. And it's about what you give attention to. We can actually unknowingly cause our fears to come to pass by worrying about them all the time, by thinking about them all the time, because even by doing that, you're still getting their attention. I once heard someone who kind of had a narcissistic personality once tell me that even bad attention is attention, so they would act out as a way to get attention, because I'd rather have bad attention than no attention. And that's how your fears are. Even bad attention is good. Even if you're praying against him and you're constantly this is not going to happen, praying against it, well, you're still giving it attention. So the key is to don't give it attention. One time God told me I had a doctor saying that I needed to have gallstones removed, and if I didn't, that I could die because it was in a dangerous situation. And I went home to pray about it, and God said, no surgery. He said the first way to remove a problem is to not give it attention. So he told me, don't even think about that anymore. Focus on who you are, who I promised you could be. Focus on your healing that I promised. Focus your identity on who you were promised to be. And don't focus your identity on your sickness, on your flaws, on your lack, on your need, on your fears. That is not part of you. That is not your identity. That is not who you are. You are all that God said that you are. You are abundant, and you are healthy, and you are happy, and you are full of love, and you have an abundantly wonderful, free life. That is your identity. Never identify with things of darkness, because that's not you. Maybe those things are trying to pull you down or give you symptoms or nag at you, but that is not who you are. So I did what God said, and I didn't give attention to those gallstones, and I just chose to forget about them. And I focused on who I am in God and who He said. I focused on His promise. He said they would just go away, and that's what happened. The gallstones that they thought that I had to have surgery to have removed, or they could have been life-threatening, they just went away. And I went back a year later, and I had an MRI, and there was no trace, there was no sign of any gallstones. I almost had my whole gallbladder removed because of what the doctor said and because of what the ultrasounds said at the hospital. But God said, no, you're healed. You don't have to have any organ removed. Just don't give it attention. So I stopped giving it attention. And this is an urgent plea to some of you, because what you're going through right now could go either direction. So please do not give attention to your fears, to your doubts, to the things that are afflicting you. Don't give it attention. Put your attention on what you hope, because God moves through your hopes. Your hopes won't disappoint you. Not when you're anchored in God's promise. Not when you look to God as your hope and your salvation. God will do what you hope and not what you fear. I pray that God would revitalize you with fresh hope today, to believe that God will do what you hope, and that He would give you like blinders, like they put on horses, that you cannot see those shadows of fear that are trying to get your attention. And it would help lead you through the light of hope, and that nothing that you fear will happen for you, but it'll be just the opposite of what you fear. Instead, everything that you hope for will come true. And it's going to come out as a beautiful surprise, because that is the delight and the gift of having to walk through the valleys, of walking next to those fears, is that when things come out, they come out as a pleasantly wonderful, good surprise. And may you be double blessed for all you've had to go through this far. I love you so much, and thank you for your time.